So far we have been discussing parts of a neuron and within a cell. So, and I have shown you how computation is done across the cell in various parts of the cell, how computation is done across cells from across the synapse, and how electrical activity can result in mechanical activity, the potentials of that, how information, how actuation is coupled with information. So, that is the biological variant of information and actuation coupling. So, what we now discuss is higher level stuff. So, so far I have been discussing very elementary issues, but without discussing the elementary issues it is not possible to go into the higher level stuff. So, it is necessary to understand, have a thorough understanding of the concepts which have been dealt so far. So, each of it would have merit in its own, to know how the biological system works. And as I had highlighted in the previous session, there are certain very novel things which the nervous system has to teach us. Of course, there are several of it, but which may have ready implementation in for several of you who are sitting and watching the course. Now, I have termed it as this talk as architecture of the nervous system. So, why I did not use the term anatomy is because anatomy sort of is it just says that what is where and what is it in, what is something in relation to something else. It is essential for us in the biological sciences to study material in this fashion, because it is we need to have an understanding of how things are situated at an independent level. For the course, I am not putting it like that, as I had promised in the beginning. Term it as architecture, because we will look at how things are in relation to each other, both in terms of structure and as well as function. So, there is going to be a lot of mix there. Once the architecture is completed, I think we will go in a lot more into the function and then build on stuff as we progress further. So, when we speak about the nervous system, we generally think of in terms, I think I have highlighted this before, in input, output and the CPU processing. So, in biological terms it is called sensory, motor and the nervous, which in turn is divided into central and peripheral. Peripheral, central as in what is the core, and peripheral as what is distributed. So, central obviously is brain and spinal cord. You have a peripheral as in the cranial nerves, peripheral nerves. There are so many other things. So, you have got plexuses, then you have there is also the system of autonomic nervous system. I think autonomic nervous system is something which we have to talk about. Autonomic. So, autonomic nervous system regulates body functions. So, it is regulation, modulation and in general housekeeping, I think that's the easier word, housekeeping. So something like heart rate, respiration, digestion, and so many other stuff which is housekeeping for the body is taken care of by the autonomic nervous system. It is basically it works at an unconscious level. So it's sort of possible. You cannot of course movies do show it very easy. You can't generally control your heart rate and several of these things. So you can't hold your breath beyond a certain point of time. Of course, I think that's a wrong example. So autonomous nervous system takes care of all of this. So central nervous system is what we will be discussing in greater detail, because autonomous nervous system is basically a biological medical topic. So when we speak about nervous system in common terms, we think of it in terms of brain, then spinal cord, nerves, and effectors and sensors. Okay, so I've done it as a top down approach because it's for easiness to understand. But please do remember that it's all a network, and there are multiple layers in the network, and these layers are integrated within that particular layer and as well as with top down. So I think whatever terminology works fine, it's fine. So the brain continues into the spinal cord, and then it continues into the nerves, and the nerves in turn are connected to effectors, which can be muscles, glands, or it can take in data from various parts of the skin, mucosal membranes, eyes, ears, and things like that. So sensations, there is some classification. I think I will just note the general, which is touch, pain, temperature, then vibration, and something called proprioception. And there are special vision, hearing, taste, what else? Oh, ESP, of course. Vision, hearing, taste, smell. Okay, first nerve, second nerve, third, fourth, fifth is something, sixth, seventh, eighth nerve is hearing, ninth and 10th. Okay, that covers about, that's about so these are the things. So you have, this is it is high density. Basically every square millimeter of your skin is covered as a lot of these sensors, and the sensation, the density differs, but it's pretty high density, very uncomparable to any kind of mechanical device, electromechanical device which we have as of now. Special sensations are very evolved senses in which there are definitive organ systems which are dedicated for a particular sensation. Obviously eye for sight, which processes photons, the visible electromagnetic spectrum, hearing, auditory spectrum, sound waves. Taste is chemical and smell is chemical. Olfaction, that is what do you call, not vaporize, I am not getting the term, gaseous, this one for smell, and taste is liquid. You need to have liquid base to have taste. So these are chemical, this one is auditory, mechanical, vision is electromagnetic. Electromagnetic, auditory is mechanical, magnetic, taste is chemical and smell is chemical. So, this is the sensory architecture. I have already spoken sometime earlier about the motor side. So, motor is you have muscle and glands. Glands can be anything, say salivary glands, glands within the GI system, so many other kinds. I am not boring you with the details. Muscle, so you have smooth muscle, then cardiac, which is in the heart, and skeletal, which is what we will be dealing with in greater detail. So, when I would be discussing muscle for this topic, we will be discussing generally skeletal muscles. The other muscles are not meaning I am not including it in discussion, neither are the glands. So, we finish the sensory system and the effector system, we come to the nervous system per se. So, there are multiple other hierarchies within the nervous system. So, if we look at how the nervous system evolved, we started with single cells which could actually detect some change within the environment and say mostly chemical. You have noxious chemicals which the cell had to go away from, and the cell had to go towards food. And so, there are very elegant experiments which have been described with phototaxis and so many other kinds of taxes in which cells move towards and away from various kinds of stimuli. At I spoke to you about higher organisms having neural nets. So, neural net is distributed organization of nerve cells which do not have a central control, but they function amongst themselves to generate. I have forgotten the organism, some 8 cells or something which act as a nervous system. So, there is nothing like a hierarchy, it is non-hierarchical, all neurons have equal powers and this one. Now, if going above that, you have nerve cells aggregated into something called ganglion, which even we have. So, the ganglions are condensations of cell bodies. We spoke about the various parts of the neuron. One thing which I have not highlighted there is generally dendrites are in close approximation with the cell body, whereas the axon can have very long lengths. So, as I told you, I think I have expressed earlier, there are long axons which span all the way from the tip of the toe to the brainstem which is situated. That is easily about 5-6 feet length of one single axon. The synapse occurs only in the back of your head here. So, that is the length of an axon, one single axon. So, there are multitudes of such axons which pass through the spinal cord intact without having this one. So, there are cell bodies in the back which give out single axon and then goes to the which takes up information from the various sensations from different parts of the body. There are also cell bodies within the spinal cord which gives out axons which go all the way into the muscle. So, they are also again single axons. So, one axon goes and meets several individual muscle cell groups, and that is something called as a motor unit. So, we have coming back to this discussion. So, we have ganglion, then we have larger there is something called plexus. Plexus is networks of nerves. They do not have cell bodies within themselves, but there is a lot of intermingling, and that is I was discussing about architecture. So, do not know actually the cause of why plexuses exist, but the mapping of various muscles to various various parts within the spinal cord and brain, they are maybe handled by the plexus. So, there is a lot of intermingling. So, there is something called the cervical plexus and there is something called lumbar plexus. So, these are these mediate information transfer from both the limbs, upper limb and lower limb, into the central nervous system. So, that is the idea of plexus. Then we have gray and white matter. What I am trying to showcase or highlight is introduce you to certain concepts which we may use subsequently in very daily terms. So, you should have an idea of that these terms exist, one, and at least some idea of what they mean. It is not necessary to know in very great detail about what they are, the precise definitions and things like that, because it is not very relevant to the point under discussion. So, we have gray and white matter. White matter is gone. So, when we speak about the brain as such, we have the brain in turn has so many other different parts. I will not bore you with the technical details of the individual parts which are biological, but you would need to know cerebrum, then you have brain stem, then you have the cerebellum. Okay, so from the brain sort of is the spinal cord, but you shouldn't think of the spinal cord as just a conduit. It is not conduit. It is not. It is its own independent processing system. So, which we will be discussing to some extent, because it is important to understand that this it is not that the spinal cord is just a mode of transferring information between the brain and the this one. So, going back to the previous slide, I've highlighted how the networks evolved. So, you had very unorganized networks, you had organized networks which form ganglia, and ganglia is the ganglion is wrong. So, ganglia, and these ganglia in higher forms condensate into this gray and white matter, and which in turn forms the part of the which is in term is called brain and spinal cord. So, yeah, so coming back to the brain, so we have these gross entities which need to be remembered. So, cerebrum is this whole stuff, what you would when you cut open the skull, or what you would see, what you see in above your eyebrows is just about the cerebrum. Brainstem is somewhat behind, deeper part. It's basically stem because it's a single cylindrical entity which continues into the spinal cord. It's in continuity. Cerebellum is somewhat on the back, and the architecture is different. So, cerebrum, brainstem, and cerebellum. We'll go into a little more detail in each of these things. So, the most interesting of it is cerebrum. So, you should remember this stuff, that is gray out, white in. So, outside the surface of the cerebrum and the cerebellum incidentally has gray matter outside and white matter inside. In the spinal cord, it is just the reverse. So, white matter on the outside and the processing in the inside. Gray is neurons, and for our understanding we put white as axons. not complicate issues with that, but it is not so simple. So, the gray matter is basically a lot of neurons, billions of neurons compactly placed in close to each other. You can imagine server farms, so maybe the body optimized it because supplying blood to the gray matter is more priority than white matter, and it is easier to send high density nutrients to the compacted stuff rather than to distributed. You have one cell body and one white matter close to each other, you may have suboptimal delivery of nutrients. Maybe that is one logic. I have no idea of whether there are any theories to the effect of why this happened. Of course, there may be embryonal theories that this gene caused that and all that, but if we look at why compaction has to happen, it should be due to some other reason. So, you have condensation of this material in different parts. So, cortex has gray matter, and then deeper down is white matter. Majority of the stuff is actually white matter. So, it is the conduit which forms the major part of the brain. The gray matter is the small thin outer part in which all of computation happens. Now, cerebrum in turn has superficial, which is on the surface, superficial, and deep, which is obviously deep. So, the superficial architecture is gray and white, that is one thing. Second thing is it is also divided into so called lobes, and so lobes are larger divisions. Then large divisions, and then you have the structure in terms of gyrus and sulcus. So, these are things which you should know. So, you have gray and white matter distributed like the way I have described. Then you have got lobes, which are sort of artificial, semi-artificial divisions between various parts of the brain. We will look into it in a greater detail. I am not going to explain anatomy like this, it is going to be in a separate class, and I am going to spend time on that. This is just to make you familiarize. So, when I start attributing names to a part, you should at least have heard the name, that is the idea. So, superficially we have this stuff which is gray and white, and then you have deep gray matter which is consists of something called as basal ganglia. So, ganglia is basically an aggregation of the cell bodies of neurons, and these are located towards the so called base of the brain, and that is one of the reasons you. So, this is constitutes of chordate, lentiform, putamen. Okay. So, these are various, there are several other kinds of nuclei. I am just listing out these important structures. There is also this entity, fluid filled entity called as ventricles, which are there within the brain. So, when we go into the brainstem, so it is top down hierarchy. So, it would be mid brain, pons, medulla. Okay. So, midbrain, pons and medulla. Then in the same context we have cerebellum. This is behind the brainstem. So, cerebellum has parts. So, hemispheres, then you have the vermis, and sort of related are tonsils and uvula. So, hemispheres in turn right and left with the same architecture, gray out, white in. Then there is also this deep nuclei. So, deep nuclei is dentate. Should I write this? Dentate emboliform, dentate emboliform, fastigious, and DFG. Not relevant. I think even I am not able to get those things, so I am not burdening with additional stuff. So, if you look at the architecture of the cerebellum and the cerebrum, there are similarities and dissimilarities. Similarities are both have outer gray, inner white. They also have this concept of outer gray and then deep gray. So, there are deep nuclei which take in stuff, information fibers from outside, and then it goes back out into the cortex, and then that is how information is processed. But similarities sort of end over there, because the cerebrum has diverse functions. It is the net integrator of all signals, the generator of thought, generator of action, the modulation of actions. Everything is controlled by the cerebrum. Cerebellum is basically a huge servo control system which modulates any kind of output. So, modulation of physical movements, hands, legs, head turning, sitting, standing, walking, speech. So, the way in which speech is modulated, not the generation of speech, how speech is modulated is controlled by the cerebellum. Brainstem is core functions, heart, then respiration, swallowing. So, many of the the most important, consciousness. Okay, so yeah, and I think I missed the important thing over here. This is basal ganglia, and you also have thalamus over here, which we have conveniently forgotten. Now, both thalamus and the brainstem are responsible for consciousness. That is a separate discussion. So, this is how the brain is organized in very simple terms. We will delve into a lot more detail subsequently, but for the time being I would want you to understand this rather than mug up stuff. How the architecture is there within how things are similar between the cerebrum and cerebellum. The brainstem is sort of continuity. So, there are similarities between the brainstem and the spinal cord. Both in terms of outer white, inner gray, being cylindrical. There are similarities between the cerebellum and the cerebrum, outer gray, inner this one. The cerebrum has gyri and sulci, and cerebellum also has gyri and sulci, but the arrangement is completely different. So, this sort of gives vanilla understanding of the nervous system architecture, just naming parts. I have just named the parts. We will go into a lot more detail and structure and function in subsequent classes. Thank you.